What would you do if the person standing quietly in front of a judge was the only one in the room who truly understood what was about to happen? The courtroom of Jefferson County was already full, but the air inside felt heavier than usual. Every seat was taken. Every eye was watching. And at the center of it all stood a black woman in a simple dark coat, calm as if she had nothing to fear. But the judge sitting high above her did not see calm. He saw disrespect. He saw someone he believed did not belong in his courtroom. Judge Oliver Grant leaned forward, his voice sharp and cold. "You will speak when I allow you to speak," he said firmly, his hand striking the gavel. The sound echoed like a warning shot across the room. "Do you understand me?" Most people in that room would have lowered their eyes. Most people would have apologized immediately. But the woman did neither. She simply looked up at him, her face steady, her expression unreadable. There was no fear in her eyes. Not even a small sign of panic. Instead, there was something unusual, something that made the room feel even more uncomfortable. "Yes, Your Honor," she finally said in a soft voice. Her tone was calm, too calm for the situation. "I understand you very well." A few people in the audience exchanged confused looks. Something about her reaction did not match the situation. She was being publicly warned, yet she stood there like she already knew how this story would end. The prosecutor sitting nearby leaned toward his table and whispered something under his breath, almost mocking her confidence. The judge noticed it, but he did not stop it. In his mind, the case was simple. Another minor violation. Another person who thought they could argue their way out of it. But what none of them noticed was how the woman's eyes slowly moved across the courtroom. She was not nervous. She was observing. Every detail. Every face. Every reaction. It was like she was reading a story only she could understand. Outside the tall courtroom windows, the city moved on as usual. Cars passed. People rushed through their day. But inside this room, time felt different. Slower. Heavier. Like something was waiting to break. The judge leaned back again, still irritated. "Let's proceed," he said, but his tone carried impatience, not justice. And that was the moment everything began to shift, even though nobody in that room realized it yet. Why does a person stay so calm when everything around them is trying to break them down? That question quietly grew inside the courtroom as the hearing continued. The black woman still stood in the same place, hands relaxed, posture steady, like she had all the time in the world. The judge, however, was becoming more irritated with every passing second. In his eyes, her silence was not confidence. It was defiance. The prosecutor cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of failure to comply," he said, pointing briefly at the woman without even looking at her properly. "There is no need to delay this any further." A few soft laughs came from the back of the room. Not loud, but enough to be heard. People were already deciding the outcome in their minds. They assumed she had nothing to say that could change anything. The judge nodded slowly, as if agreeing with something already decided long before this hearing began. "Then let us not waste time," he said coldly. His eyes moved toward the woman again. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" For a moment, there was only silence. She did not rush to answer. She did not panic. Instead, she looked down slightly, as if collecting her thoughts. Then she looked up again, meeting the judge's eyes directly. "Yes," she said quietly. That single word changed the energy in the room. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Calm. Controlled. Certain. But she did not continue. Instead, she paused. A long pause. Too long for comfort. The prosecutor frowned. The judge tapped his fingers once on the desk. Even the audience shifted in their seats. People expected her to explain herself, to defend her position, to show fear or weakness. But she did none of that. Instead, she asked something unexpected. "Before I answer," she said softly, "can I ask something?" The judge narrowed his eyes. He did not like being questioned, especially not by someone in her position. But something about her tone stopped him from interrupting immediately. "Go on," he said finally, though his voice carried warning. She tilted her head slightly. "Has anyone here actually looked at the file completely?" A strange silence fell. The prosecutor quickly responded, "Everything relevant is already in the file." But the woman's expression did not change. In fact, it almost looked like she expected that answer. And then she said something even more unusual. "Interesting," she whispered. That single word was soft, but it carried weight. Enough weight to make a few people in the room exchange uneasy looks. Because for the first time, it did not feel like she was defending herself. It felt like she was waiting for something, or someone. And the worst part was, nobody knew what that something was. What if the person everyone thinks is powerless, is actually the only one who knows how this entire case will end? That thought didn't just pass through the courtroom, it started to grow inside it. The judge leaned forward again, clearly losing patience. "Enough of this," he said sharply. "We are not here for riddles. We are here for facts." But the woman did not react to his anger. She simply took a slow breath and looked down at the small folder in her hands. It was plain, almost unimportant looking. Nothing about it suggested power or importance. Yet she held it carefully, like it mattered more than anything else in the room. The prosecutor noticed it too. "Your Honor," he said quickly, "she is trying to delay the hearing with unnecessary questions." A few people in the audience nodded in agreement. The room was slowly turning against her, one assumption at a time. That is how it always happens, when silence is misunderstood as weakness. But then something small happened. A court clerk sitting near the side table suddenly paused while looking at the case file. He blinked once. Then again. His face changed slightly, like he had seen something he did not expect. The judge noticed it. "Is there a problem?" he asked. The clerk hesitated. "No, Your Honor. It's just," he stopped mid-sentence and looked back at the file again. His fingers tightened slightly around the papers. The woman noticed him too. But she said nothing. That silence again. Heavy. Controlled. Strange. The prosecutor leaned in and whispered something to the clerk, but the clerk shook his head slightly, as if unsure. That small moment was enough to create discomfort in the room. The judge's eyes narrowed. "If there is something relevant, speak now." The clerk quickly straightened up. "No, Your Honor. Everything is in order." But his voice did not sound fully convinced. And that was the problem. Because now the atmosphere had changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But quietly, like a hidden thread had been pulled somewhere, and nobody knew what would unravel next. The woman finally looked up again. Her eyes moved from the clerk to the judge, then slowly across the entire courtroom. "I think," she said softly, "some people are looking at the wrong version of the story." The prosecutor scoffed. "There is only one version here." But she did not respond to him. Instead, she closed the folder halfway, then stopped. That small action alone made the judge's attention sharpen. Because something about her confidence no longer felt normal. It no longer felt like defense. It felt like patience. Like she was waiting for the exact right moment, when everything in this room would no longer be under anyone else's control. And nobody in that courtroom realized it yet. But that moment was getting closer. What happens when the people in control start to feel that they are not fully in control anymore? The courtroom was still speaking, but the energy inside it had changed. It was subtle at first. Small pauses. Slight glances. A growing discomfort that no one wanted to admit out loud. Judge Oliver Grant noticed it too, but he refused to accept it. In his courtroom, he was the final authority. He leaned back in his chair and tapped the gavel once, harder than before. "Let's move forward," he said sharply. "We are not going to waste time on confusion." But the woman in the dark coat did not look confused at all. In fact, she looked more settled than anyone else in the room. The prosecutor quickly stepped forward again. "Your Honor, the defendant is clearly attempting to create doubt where none exists," he said. His voice was confident, almost rehearsed. "This is a straightforward matter." A few people nodded again. The courtroom liked simple answers. It liked order. It liked certainty. But certainty was exactly what was starting to break. The court clerk, still holding the file, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He looked like someone who had seen a word in a book he had read many times before, but suddenly understood it in a very different way. He whispered something under his breath, too quiet for most to hear. The judge noticed again. "If you have something to say it clearly," he ordered. The clerk hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor. It's just. I thought I recognized something." "Recognized what?" the prosecutor snapped immediately. But the clerk didn't answer. He just lowered his eyes and went silent again. That silence did something strange. It did not end the moment. It extended it. The woman finally moved for the first time in a while. She placed the folder gently on the table beside her. No rush. No hesitation. Just control. Then she spoke again, softly. People often see what they expect to see, she said. The prosecutor gave a small laugh. And what are we supposed to see instead? Some hidden truth. For the first time, a faint shift appeared in her expression. Not fear. Not anger. Something closer to understanding. You might not be ready for that answer, she said. That line hit the room differently. The judge straightened slightly. This is not a game, he said firmly. If you have a defense, present it. If not, we will proceed. But she did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at the folder again. And for just a second, it felt like she was no longer the one standing trial. It felt like she was the one quietly observing everyone else. The prosecutor leaned closer to the judge. She's stalling, he whispered. But the judge did not respond right away this time. Because something was starting to bother him too. Not what she was saying, but what she was not saying. And in a courtroom built on words, silence was the most dangerous thing of all. What if the silence in a courtroom is not empty, but full of something nobody has noticed yet? That question seemed to hang in the air now, heavier than before. The judge tried to ignore it, but even he could feel it. Something about this case was no longer ordinary. Judge Oliver Grant leaned forward again. His patience was starting to crack. Enough delays, he said firmly. We will proceed with the facts as presented. The prosecutor immediately stepped in, almost too quickly. Yes, Your Honor. The evidence is clear. There is no complication here. But this time, his voice did not sound as confident as before. The woman stood quietly, still calm, still controlled. But now her calm felt different. It was no longer just silence. It felt like waiting. Waiting for something very specific. The court clerk suddenly shifted again in his seat. He opened the file slowly, almost unwillingly. His eyes scanned the pages once more. This time, he did not look confused. He looked unsettled. The judge noticed it immediately. Why do you keep reacting like that? He asked sharply. The clerk swallowed. Your Honor. I'm just reviewing the case details again. Then do it properly, the judge replied. But the clerk did not respond. Instead, his fingers paused on one page for a long moment. Too long. The prosecutor leaned in slightly. What is it? He whispered. The clerk hesitated. Then quietly said, I think. I've seen this name before. That sentence changed the air instantly. The prosecutor frowned. That's impossible. But the clerk didn't look convinced anymore. He slowly turned the file slightly, as if showing it to himself again just to be sure. The woman finally looked up. Not at the clerk. Not at the prosecutor. At the judge. And for the first time, there was something in her eyes that felt sharper than calm. The judge noticed it too. If there is an issue with identification, speak clearly, he demanded. The clerk quickly shook his head. No, Your Honor. It might just be my mistake. But he did not sound like someone who believed that. A quiet tension spread across the courtroom. People who were relaxed earlier now sat straighter. Even those who were uninterested began paying attention. The woman finally spoke again, her voice soft but steady. It's interesting how memory works, she said. The prosecutor frowned. What is that supposed to mean? But she did not answer him. Instead, she looked at the file again, then gently pushed it closer to the center table. That small movement felt heavier than anything said in the courtroom so far. The judge's eyes narrowed. Are you trying to imply something? She paused. A long pause. And then she said, I am not implying anything. I am simply waiting for everyone to see what is already written. That sentence landed like a quiet shock. Because now, for the first time, it did not feel like she was defending herself. It felt like she was inviting them to read something they had completely misunderstood from the very beginning. And the worst part was, nobody yet knew what they were about to discover. What happens when the truth is sitting right in front of everyone, but nobody is ready to see it yet? The courtroom felt tighter now, as if the walls themselves had moved closer. The judge noticed the shift in energy, but he refused to give it power. In his mind, this was still a simple hearing. A routine matter. Nothing more. Let's stop circling around vague statements, Judge Oliver Grant said firmly. If you have something to say it directly. The prosecutor nodded quickly. Exactly, Your Honor. We are all waiting for a clear defense or a clear admission. But the woman did not react to either of them. She stood still, her hands relaxed, her posture calm. And yet, there was something different now. The calm was no longer soft. It was focused. Like a clock ticking toward a moment nobody else could hear. The court clerk looked down at the file again. This time, he did not flip pages quickly. He studied them slowly, carefully. His expression grew heavier with every passing second. The judge noticed again. "You," he said sharply, pointing toward the clerk. "Tell me exactly what you are seeing." The clerk hesitated. The room went silent. Then he spoke quietly, "Your Honor, this case file, it's been referenced before." The prosecutor immediately shook his head. "That's not helpful. Every case has references." But the clerk didn't stop. He swallowed hard. "No. I mean in a different context. In another department record." That sentence changed the atmosphere instantly. The prosecutor frowned. "What are you talking about?" The clerk's voice dropped even lower. "I'm not completely sure yet, but I think this name appears in higher-level legal records." A faint tension spread through the courtroom. People started looking at each other instead of the woman. The certainty that had filled the room earlier was slowly cracking. The judge leaned forward. "Higher-level records," he repeated. "Be precise." But the clerk shook his head again. "I need more time to verify." The judge's patience finally broke slightly. Then stopped speaking in half-sentences. Silence followed. The woman finally moved again. Slowly, she stepped forward just half a step. Not enough to be threatening. Not enough to be dramatic. But enough to draw attention. And then she said something very simple. "I think," she said softly, "some of you are trying very hard not to connect the dots." The prosecutor gave a short laugh, but it sounded forced. "There are no dots to connect. This is a minor case." But she looked at him calmly. "That depends on what you are willing to recognize." That line made the room quiet again. Because now it no longer felt like she was defending herself. It felt like she was waiting for someone else in the room to finally understand what she already knew. The judge tapped his fingers once on the desk. "If you are suggesting hidden information," he said slowly, "then present it properly." She looked at him for a long moment. And then she replied, "It will be presented, at the right time." That was the moment everything shifted again. Not loudly. Not visibly. But deeply. Because now, even the judge could no longer fully ignore the feeling that this case was not as small as he wanted it to be. And somewhere in that silence, something important was about to surface. What happens when the person everyone is doubting starts to look like the only one who truly understands the courtroom? The silence in the room was no longer comfortable. It was heavy, almost uncomfortable enough to make people shift in their seats without knowing why. Even the judge could feel it now, though he refused to admit it openly. Judge Oliver Grant straightened his robe slightly and spoke in a colder tone. "This is the final warning," he said. "If there is no clear defense, we will move toward judgment." The prosecutor nodded quickly, almost too eager. "Yes, Your Honor. There is no reason for further delay. The facts are already established." But this time, even his confidence felt slightly unstable. The woman stood in the same place, still calm, still steady. But her eyes were different now. They were not just observing anymore. They were measuring. Like she was waiting for a specific reaction from someone in the room. The court clerk suddenly closed the file halfway. That small action caught the judge's attention immediately. "What are you doing?" the judge asked sharply. The clerk hesitated. "Your Honor, I think I need to cross-check something before we continue." The prosecutor turned toward him. "Cross-check what?" "This is basic case material." But the clerk did not respond right away. He looked uncomfortable now, as if he had stepped into something larger than he expected. "I just want to be certain," he finally said. The judge's expression hardened. "Then be certain quickly." A few seconds passed. No one spoke. The courtroom felt suspended, like time had slowed down again. The woman finally broke the silence. "It's interesting," she said softly, "how quickly certainty turns into doubt when something unexpected appears." The prosecutor scoffed. "There is nothing unexpected here." But he was not looking at her anymore. His eyes were now shifting toward the clerk. The clerk opened the file again, but this time he didn't read it like before. He scanned it with urgency, almost as if searching for something he had ignored earlier. Then he stopped. Completely. His face changed. The judge noticed immediately. "What is it now?" he demanded. The clerk swallowed hard. "Your Honor, I think this case number, it matches a sealed reference code." That sentence hit the room differently. The prosecutor frowned sharply. "That makes no sense." But the clerk shook his head slightly. "I'm not saying I understand it yet. I'm saying I've seen this format before, in restricted legal archives." Now even the judge's expression changed slightly. "Not fully. But enough." "Restricted archives," he repeated slowly. The clerk nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." A strange tension spread instantly. The earlier confidence in the room started to break into uncertainty. People were no longer watching the woman the same way. They were watching the file now. The woman finally looked down at the folder she had placed earlier. Then she gently tapped it once with her finger. That small sound felt too loud in the silence. "You are very close," she said softly. The prosecutor immediately reacted. "Close to what? What are you talking about?" But she didn't answer him. Instead, she lifted her eyes slowly toward the judge. And for the first time, her calm felt like control. Not defense. Control. The judge felt it too. A slight discomfort he could not explain. Because now it was no longer about whether she was guilty or innocent. It was about what exactly was sitting inside that file, that nobody had fully understood yet. And somewhere in that realization, the truth was about to take its first breath. What happens when a courtroom full of confident people suddenly realizes they might have been looking at the wrong reality the entire time? The tension inside the courtroom had changed again, but this time it was not just suspicion. It was uncertainty. The kind that spreads quietly and makes even confident people start second-guessing themselves. Judge Oliver Grant sat still for a moment longer than usual. His hand hovered near the gavel, but he did not strike it. For the first time, he seemed to be listening instead of controlling. "Explain yourself clearly," he said at last, his voice lower than before. "What exactly are you implying about this file?" The court clerk hesitated again. His fingers tightened around the document. "Your Honor, I'm not implying anything yet. I'm saying this case reference, it connects to a restricted legal record system." A soft murmur passed through the room. People were no longer fully relaxed in their seats. Some leaned forward. Some exchanged confused glances. The prosecutor quickly stepped in. "This is unnecessary confusion," he said firmly, but his tone lacked its earlier strength. "We are talking about a simple violation. There is no hidden system involved." But even as he spoke, he glanced once at the file again, as if making sure he had not missed something himself. The woman remained still. Calm. Silent. But her silence now felt different. It no longer felt like waiting. It felt like timing. The judge finally turned his attention back to her. "You have been very confident throughout this hearing," he said slowly. "If there is something you are hiding behind that confidence, now is the time to speak." For a moment, she did not answer. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath with her. Then she took a slow step forward. Not aggressive. Not dramatic. Just steady. "I am not hiding anything," she said softly. "I am simply watching how long it takes for the truth to be recognized." That sentence landed heavily in the room. The prosecutor frowned. "Truth? The truth is already in front of us." But she shook her head slightly. "No," she said. "What you have in front of you is only what you were allowed to see." That line changed the atmosphere again. The clerk looked down quickly at the file, then back up again, visibly unsettled. "Your Honor, there is something else," he said suddenly. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Speak." The clerk hesitated longer this time. Then he opened the file fully and pointed at a specific line. "This reference code, it appears linked to a name clearance registry." The prosecutor turned sharply. "That's impossible. This is a traffic-related case." But the clerk shook his head. "Not according to this format." A new silence followed. A deeper one. The woman finally looked at the judge directly. Her expression did not change, but her presence in the room felt stronger now. "You see," she said gently, "some files are not what they first appear to be." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Then what are you suggesting this file is?" She paused. A long pause again. And in that pause, the entire room felt something shift, like the story was slowly turning in a direction nobody had expected. Because now, even the judge could no longer fully deny it. This case was not ordinary. And whatever was hidden inside that file, was getting closer to being exposed. What happens when the truth that everyone tried to ignore, finally steps out of the shadows? The courtroom was no longer calm. It was controlled chaos hidden under silence. No one was speaking loudly, but every face in the room had changed. The certainty that once filled the air had now turned into doubt. Judge Oliver Grant looked at the file again, this time more carefully. His expression was no longer fully confident. "If there is something unusual in this document," he said slowly, "then it should be presented clearly and without delay." The court clerk swallowed before speaking. "Your Honor, I think this file is linked to a sealed identity confirmation record." The prosecutor immediately reacted. "This is going too far," he said sharply. "We are not dealing with identities. We are dealing with a simple legal violation." But even as he spoke, his voice did not carry the same control anymore. The woman stood quietly, watching them all. Still calm. Still steady. But now there was something different in her silence. It was no longer just patience. It felt like arrival. The judge turned toward her again. "You have been very confident from the beginning," he said. "If there is something important you are withholding, this is your final chance to speak clearly." For a moment, she said nothing. The entire room felt that pause. Then she slowly stepped forward. Not rushed. Not emotional. Just steady. "I did not come here to create confusion," she said softly. "I came here because I knew this moment would eventually arrive." The prosecutor frowned. "What moment?" he snapped. "This is a hearing, not a performance." But she did not look at him. She was looking at the judge. And for the first time, her words carried weight that was not emotional, but structural. Like something already decided long before this courtroom existed. The clerk suddenly turned a page in the file and stopped breathing for a second. His hand froze. "Your Honor," he said slowly. The judge's eyes narrowed. "What is it now?" The clerk pointed at a line near the bottom of the page. "This confirmation code, it is not for a traffic case." The prosecutor leaned in. "Then what is it for?" The clerk hesitated, then said quietly, "It matches the format used for high-level legal authority identification records." A heavy silence followed. This time, no one interrupted it. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Explain in simple terms," he said. The clerk's voice dropped even lower. "It means, this file may belong to someone with recognized legal authority beyond standard jurisdiction." For a moment, nobody spoke. Even the prosecutor looked unsure now. The woman finally moved again. She gently placed her hand on the edge of the table. Then she said something very calm. "I was wondering how long it would take," she said. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Take to do what?" She looked at him directly. And for the first time, her calm turned into something heavier. "Take to realize," she said softly, "that I am not the person you thought I was when this hearing began." A ripple of tension moved through the courtroom. The prosecutor shook his head slightly. "This is ridiculous," but even he did not sound fully convinced anymore. Because now, everything was pointing toward one uncomfortable possibility. That the woman standing in front of them had never been just a defendant. And whatever her true identity was, it was about to surface. What happens when the truth finally stops waiting, and decides to reveal itself? The courtroom felt completely still now. Not quiet in a normal way, but frozen. Even the judge did not speak immediately. His hand rested near the gavel, but he did not move it. Judge Oliver Grant stared at the woman for a long moment. "If you are trying to intimidate this court," he said slowly, "you should understand that it will not work." The woman gave a small, calm shake of her head. "I am not here to intimidate anyone," she said softly. "I am here because this court file was never meant to be treated as a simple violation." The prosecutor tried to step in, but his voice came out weaker than before. "Then explain it," he said quickly. "Right now." A pause. A long, heavy pause filled the room again. The woman slowly reached into the folder and placed one single document on the table. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the clerk leaned forward slightly, as if afraid of what he might see. The judge finally looked down at it. And his expression changed. Not suddenly. But completely. Because whatever was written on that page, was not what anyone expected from a simple courtroom hearing. The woman's voice remained calm. "I didn't come here as a defendant," she said. "I came here as the person this file was originally assigned to." A sharp silence hit the room. The prosecutor whispered, "That's impossible." But the judge did not respond. He just kept looking at the document. And for the first time, the courtroom understood. This case had never been about her guilt. It had been about her identity. And now, it was finally exposed.